The first thing I remember was the sound that never came. I stood knee-deep in the cane, shirt stuck to my back, lantern hissing in my hand. Across the rows, a procession of torches advanced in perfect file, windless flames upright, feet disturbing no leaf, no stone. The night air pressed cold against my teeth as their helmets glimmered without casting any shadow. Men have asked me many times to recount this night, though few truly wish to hear it. If you would have the rest, indulge an old man. Lend this tale your regard, mark your approval, and set down your thoughts below, so it need not rest only in my memory. It began 3 weeks earlier, on the 12th of June, 1905, at the Kahili camp above Lihue on Kauai. I had come from San Francisco that spring, hired as a surveyor for the Lihue Plantation Company, to measure new irrigation ditches across the higher cane fields. I was 29, full of figures and confidence, and I believed that every riddle yielded, if pressed properly, to a rule or an instrument. Our small party consisted of myself, a Portuguese overseer named Manuel Silva, and 2 Hawaiian field hands assigned as guides and laborers, brothers named Kalani and Paele. Manuel smoked cheroots that smelled of tar and clove and swore fluently in 3 languages whenever my level stuck. Kalani moved with a quiet, thoughtful care, correcting my place names without offense. Paele laughed often and loudly, though he always grew still at dusk. On that first Sunday evening, after supper of rice and salt meat, we sat outside the bunkhouse, sharing tobacco while the cane whispered in the trade wind. Manuel passed me his tin, tapping ash off the end of his cigar. "You married, Mr. Carter?" he asked, though he already knew. "Yes, a year now. My wife is in Oakland. She wishes me home before Christmas." He grunted and looked toward the dark slopes. "Best you send her a good share while you can. Sugar is money, but sugar is also trouble." Kalani rolled a cigarette of pakalolo in brown paper. "My boy is 5, he said softly. "He likes when I bring him the cane tops to chew. He says they are swords." He smiled, but his eyes did not leave the mountains. Only later did I understand how that small remark would echo. My work began before sunrise. I set the brass transit upon its tripod, adjusted the spirit level, and called out bearings while Piler marked stakes in the earth. The mornings held nothing but honest labor. The bite of the machetes through stalk and leaf, the sweetness of crushed cane, the whine of insects rising as the sun climbed. If I felt any unease, I attributed it to the closeness of the air and the foreign calls of birds. The first oddity appeared on the 17th. We had spent the day running a line along a ridge that sloped toward a gulch called Waiahi. By late afternoon, a light mist clung to the higher ground, but the sky remained bright. As we returned toward camp, I noticed prints in the red dirt track that cut through the cane. They resembled barefoot human impressions, but longer than any I had seen, the toes narrow, the arch very high. They crossed the track at a sharp angle, coming down from the Mauka side and vanishing into the cane toward the sea. There were perhaps 30 of them, crisp as if pressed that moment. Yet the soil around them showed no signs of scuffing or slide, and the cane on either side of the path stood unbroken. I crouched and placed my own boot beside one. The print extended nearly 4 inches beyond my heel. The distance between steps suggested a stride impossible for any ordinary man. I called to Manuel. "Perhaps some Kanaka with foolish long feet," he said, though his voice lacked its usual derision. "Or a trick. Boys from camp. But the leaves, I said. Nothing pushed aside. Kalani and Paile had halted several yards back and would come no closer. When I asked their opinion, Kalani only said, "Better we go, Mr. Carter. The light goes fast up here." His gaze avoided the prints entirely. I took measurements in my field notebook, intending later to ascribe it to some combination of wash and distortion. That explanation satisfied me then. 2 days afterward, the sounds began. At first, I heard them only in the change of shift before dawn, when the camp lay mostly asleep and the cane seemed to breathe. From the direction of the higher fields came a faint rattling, like bamboo spears touching in practice, and a faint rise and fall that could almost have been chanting, though I told myself it was merely the wind conducting itself strangely among the stalks. "It is nothing," Manuel said when I mentioned it. "The Japanese up at Kapaya, maybe, marching for their exercises." The sound travels. However, the Japanese camp lay miles away, and every morning the sounds came from a slightly different quarter of the hills, as though some invisible column passed along the upper edges of our world. I tried, once, to fix a bearing with my compass, but the needle trembled and swung wide for long seconds before settling uncertainly. "Old magnet," I muttered at the time, though it had served me well enough on the voyage from Honolulu. On the 21st, the absence arrived, more disturbing than any sound. We had climbed to the very upper limit of the planted cane, where the fields ended in scrub uluhe and ohia. My task was to mark a future flume line that would carry water down to the lower terraces. Around noon, while Manuel argued with a distant foreman about labor allocation, I walked a short distance alone along the ridge, transit over my shoulder. Without warning, the world went still. The insect hum ceased. The birds fell silent. Even the breeze that had combed the cane all morning dropped away. And I took 2 or 3 more steps before I realized that my own footfalls sounded unnaturally loud, as though I moved inside some muffled chamber. I looked back. The men were less than 100 yards away, yet I could hear none of their argument. I stood at the center of a small hollow in the ridge, no wider than a good yard or 2. The air within that circle felt heavy, almost viscous, and several of the cane stalks at its edge bore brown scars, as if a blade had sliced clean through them long ago. The hair on my arms lifted. Then, as suddenly as it had faltered, the breeze returned, and with it the drone of life. Manuel's raised voice reached me again. When I told him, he spat and said, "You stepped in someone's old heiau," or some such foolishness. "These people build sacred ground everywhere. Best not think on it." Yet that evening, as we cooked our supper, I saw Kalani glance up toward that same ridge more than once, his jaw working as if he chewed something bitter. It was Kalani who first named what the others feared. The camp had gathered by the cookhouse, the younger men playing cards, old ones singing low mele. I sat on the steps, cleaning the glass of my level, when Paile joined me. His earlier laughter was gone. "You heard them again today, Mr. Carter," he said. "I heard nothing that cannot be explained," I replied. He looked to his brother, who stood in the shadows. Something passed between them, some silent question. At length, Kalani came forward and sat on the ground at my feet. "There are nights," he said, "when the old ones walk. The ali'i and their warriors. They go along the old trails, the ahupua lines. If their path crosses yours, you must lie flat, eyes down, or be taken. We call them waka'i po, the Nightmarchers." His words carried no drama, only a plain statement. I smiled politely and said that such tales came wherever labourers gathered, in mines and on ships alike. Men invented spectres to make sense of accident and misfortune. "Do not stand in their way," Kalani said simply. "That is all." He rose and went to his bunk. Had I understood what he offered me then, I might have taken greater heed. The weeks wore on. Tracks appeared twice more, each time crossing a path or furrow and vanishing into unmarked cane. Once I found them overlapping my own prints of the previous day, though the soil had remained dry. The strange rattling and distant chanting visited us irregularly, sometimes so faint I nearly doubted my own hearing, sometimes distinct enough that even Manuel fell quiet until it passed. In late June, the dogs began to flee. The plantation kept mongrels for ratting and for warning of trespassers. They roamed freely, lean yellow shapes always nosing about for scraps. One afternoon, a pair followed us up toward the Waiahi Ridge, tongues lolling. We had nearly reached that silent hollow when both animals halted as if struck. The hair along their spines rose. Without so much as a snarl, they turned and bolted downslope, tails tucked, scattering loose stones. I called after them, but they did not slow. They vanished among the lower rows, and we did not see them again for several days. When they finally slunk back into camp, their ribs showed, and they lay as close as possible to the cookhouse door, refusing to return to the fields. By then, my own assurances rang thin. Each new occurrence might be explained in isolation, but together they formed a pattern my training had not prepared me to address. What marched along those unseen lines in the hills? And why did the earth itself seem to remember their passing? The micro-shock that broke our uneasy routine came on the first night of July, a little past midnight. I had remained awake to complete a set of calculations by lantern while the others slept. The camp sounds had dwindled to the occasional snore and rustle of palm leaves. Without warning, my lantern dimmed, the flame shrinking to a blue pinhead before flaring again. At that same instant, every bunkhouse lamp along the row guttered in sympathy, then steadied. From outside came a single resounding crash, as though a heavy crate had been dropped from a height. I seized the lantern and hurried out. The moon rode behind thin cloud, enough to show the open yard and the line of cane fields beyond. No crate lay overturned, no tool displaced. Yet a track of crushed grass led from the yard centre straight to the edge of the cane. The path was a narrow, perfect ribbon, as if many feet had passed in formation, pressing each stem flat. My own breath sounded harsh. From the nearest bunkhouse, Manuel called, "What in God's name was that?" "Nothing broken," I answered, though I did not believe it. We followed the crushed line a little way into the cane, but it ended abruptly after 20 yards, the stalks thereafter standing untouched. When we returned to camp, Kalani sat awake on his bunk, eyes wide. "They march early tonight," he murmured. In spite of myself, I hesitated before sleep, listening for drums that did not sound, wondering what had caused every lantern flame to falter in the same heartbeat. It is difficult now to place the exact moment when my skepticism began to crumble. Perhaps it was that same night when I woke with the certainty that men were passing outside my window, though I heard only their absence, the peculiar hollow quiet I had felt upon the ridge. Perhaps it was a day later when I found my transit tripod toppled in a patch of soft earth, its brass legs unmarked, though 3 long, obscure symbols had been scored into the ground around it with some point harder than steel. Those markings troubled me. They resembled neither letters nor numerals, but something older, formed of straight strokes and curves that suggested a deliberate hand. I sketched them in my notebook, intending later to seek an explanation from some scholar in Honolulu. Yet when I compared the sketch to the original that afternoon, the earth held only irregular scratches, as if my memory had embroidered a simple accident. Or had the marks themselves altered? On the 10th of July, the air changed. Trade winds failed, leaving the island under a great still dome of heat. Haze lay over the cane. Men worked more slowly, tempers frayed, and the faint rattling in the distance came more often, gaining in harsh metallic timbre. On the 12th, the plantation manager ordered us to complete the upper survey before the next rains. That night, the cook advised us quietly not to go. "Old nights," he said, stirring his pot. "Bad for walking the high ground. And the kapu paths wake up." Manuel laughed and told him he would lose his job if the flume line sat unfinished, haunted or not. I said little, because in truth, my own sleep had become troubled by dreams of marching columns, their torches soundless. The day of the encounter arrived on the 14th of July. A grey overcast smothered the sky, though no rain fell. We climbed to the ridge above Waiahi with 2 days' provisions and my instruments, intending to camp there and survey until the work was done. Even the dogs would not follow us. I recall the climb with peculiar clarity, Manuel cursing the sticky soil, Paele pausing more often than usual to wipe his face, Kalani moving steadily, his lips working in silent chant. The cane around us seemed taller, the leaves brushing at our shoulders like the touch of unseen hands. We made camp near that same hollow where I had once felt the world hold its breath. Manuel set up a small canvas tent for himself. The rest of us would sleep under a fly cloth. I devoted the afternoon to readings, forcing my concentration onto angles and distances, the calm logic of figures. By late day, we had carried the line across the ridge and into a shallow saddle that overlooked a labyrinth of valleys below. As the sun sank, a faint mist rose from those gullies, dulling the colours of the fields. The air grew perceptibly cooler. I remember the sensation of the thermometer in my hand dropping 2 degrees in as many minutes, though the sky remained blank and windless. "Too soon for night air," I muttered. We built a small fire from dry guava branches and ate rice and tinned beef. For a brief time, the ordinary act of chewing and swallowing steadied us. Paele told a story of his boy who had tried to plant sugar in the small garden behind their house, only to produce a tangle of weeds. Manuel described Madeira, where the stones of the terraces warmed your feet even after dark. In that pocket of talk and shared food, I felt almost myself again. We finished with a little coffee, boiled black in a dented pot. Kalani did not drink, but poured his share on the ground, murmuring something I could not catch. Shortly after full dark, the sounds began. They came first as a tremor under the feet, a faint thrumming that travelled up through the soil rather than the air. Then the rattling commenced, and the unmistakable clash of spear on shield or staff on stone carrying across the ridge from the north. There followed a low chant, too far to resolve into words, but ordered and rhythmic, like the surge of surf heard from miles away. Manuel stood and peered into the blackness. "Some damned parade," he said, though without conviction. The dogs in the distant lower camp set up a wild barking, then fell silent all at once. That silence rolled toward us, as though borne on an unseen wind. The insects died away, the leaves stilled. Even the fire seemed to hush, its crackling subdued. Kalani's face had gone colorless. "They are on the old trail from Wailua," he whispered. "It runs along this ridge. We must leave the path, now." I had always considered myself a practical man, yet fear is a contagion, and his certainty infected me. We kicked dirt over the fire and gathered what we could by touch. The chant drew nearer, individual voices now discernible, deep and resonant, answering and overlapping. No footsteps reached our ears, yet the sense of a great host in motion pressed upon us from the dark. We retreated downslope into the cane, stumbling among the stalks until Kalani raised a hand. "No further," he said. "If we go too far, the field will turn us about. Here, lie down, face to the earth. Do not look up, whatever you hear." The notion that a plantation field might somehow confound our sense of direction seemed absurd, yet something in the texture of the night made argument impossible. We lay as instructed, side by side in the narrow furrow between rows, the damp soil cool against our chests, and my heart pounded so violently that it hurt. The procession reached the ridge. I knew it had done so because the air itself altered. A sudden bitter smell flooded over us, sharp as old sweat and sea salt, and something metallic, not blood, but like it. The temperature fell until the sweat on my neck chilled. The chanting now came from directly above, layered and complex. Some voices high, some so low they were felt more than heard. Then the torches arrived. I saw them at first only as an orange glow through the cane leaves ahead, wavering but never flickering in any wind. The light grew stronger until thin bars of it slipped between the stalks, striping the ground. It moved in orderly lines, as though borne by men in tight formation, yet no boot strike, no rustle of clothing accompanied it. Against every command of reason and of Kalani, I lifted my head. The ridge lay no more than 10 yards above us, a dark line against the paler sky. Upon it marched a column of figures, each perhaps 6 or 7 feet in height, spaced at equal intervals. Helmets or crests rose above their heads, feathered shapes that caught the torchlight. Some carried long spears, others what appeared to be clubs or standards. Their bodies were draped in cloaks that moved as though heavy, yet their feet disturbed neither dust nor stone. Most dreadful of all was their silence. The chant poured from the column, yet the mouths beneath those helmets did not move. The torches burned, yet no smoke rose. The ground shook faintly with their passage, yet their legs did not bend as earthly legs do. Each figure seemed carved from the night itself, only the edges gilded by flame. As they drew level with our hiding place, my lantern, which hung from my belt by habit, burst into sudden light, though I had not touched it. The nearest warrior halted, its head turned slowly, as if scenting. The torch it held leaned outward, casting a beam of light down into the cane. The smell of salt and age thickened until I could hardly breathe. I saw then that where its eyes should have been, 2 pale glimmerings stared, dull as shells picked long ago from the reef. Kalani's hand clamped upon my neck, forcing my face into the earth. "Down," he hissed. "For your life." I obeyed. The soil tasted of iron and old water. All along the ridge the procession paused. The chanting ceased, leaving a pressure in the ears like deep water. I felt a tension, vast and impersonal, sweep across our small, huddled forms. For an instant, the world held like the moment before a wave breaks. Then, somewhere farther along the ridge, a conch shell sounded, high and commanding. The pressure lifted. The chant resumed, louder than before, and the column moved on, their torches processing along the ridge and descending by some invisible slope into the gulches beyond. Gradually, the smell thinned, the ground stilled, the ordinary night sounds crept back. We lay unmoving until long after the last glimmer of light had vanished. When at last I rolled onto my back, the stars overhead shone with startling clarity as though newly washed. None of us spoke until dawn stained the east. Manuel looked 20 years older. Paile shivered, though the air had grown warm again. Kalani's eyes held a distant look I had not seen in any living man. We abandoned the survey. No order from manager or owner could have compelled us to remain upon that ridge another night. We descended to the main camp in a near silence, broken only once when Manuel said, very quietly, "The ground under them shook, but there was no weight." Did you feel that I nodded, unable to shape more words? At the plantation office, our report met with instant disbelief. The manager, a spare Scotsman named Macpherson, listened with tightening lips as I described the column, the torches, the unnatural hush. When I spoke of the lantern flaring by itself, he interrupted. "You expect me to forward such nonsense to Honolulu," he said. "There are already rumors enough among the men. You will state that you encountered a native funeral procession, nothing more, and that superstitious talk caused certain hysterics." Manuel opened his mouth, then closed it. The brothers said nothing at all. In the written report I produced, I obeyed the demand in form, but not in spirit. I noted an unexplained march of local participants along an old trail, their apparent aversion to contact, and the singular effect upon acoustic and thermal conditions observed concurrently. It was the furthest I could go without being dismissed outright. The official record filed with the company omitted even those modest phrases. In its place stood a dry account of incomplete survey work due to labor agitation and inclement atmosphere. No mention of torches that cast no heat or of feet that stirred no dust. Among ourselves, the tale spread in another fashion. Men from other camps came to ask what we had seen. Some crossed themselves, others nodded as if long expecting such news. Old field hands traced paths in the dirt, showing where the ancient chiefs once traveled. A few white overseers laughed, but their mirth always died quickly when night fell. Within a month, Kalani left the plantation to fish along the coast, saying his boy needed a father near the sea instead of the cane. Paele followed. Manuel remained 3 more years before returning to Madeira. When I last saw him, he said only, "There are places where the old armies still drill. Best we leave them their parade ground." His hands still shook when thunder rolled over the hills. As for me, I completed my contract and sailed back to Oakland that winter. In the city, amid the clatter of streetcars and the reek of coal smoke, I might have persuaded myself that fatigue and suggestion had combined to trick my senses. After all, no photograph, no spoor, no broken branch beyond the crushed ribbon of grass, and the peculiar tracks remained to testify. Yet whenever fog rolled in from the bay and muffled the world, I recalled that ridge, and doubt thinned. I attempted, in those early years, to investigate quietly. I wrote to a professor at the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, inquiring about pre-contact trails above Lihue and rituals associated with them. His reply mentioned the Huaka'i Po almost in passing, noting that while many Hawaiians continue to report nocturnal processions, such beliefs are of course legendary, though they may encode memories of historical battle routes. His courteous dismissal did nothing to blunt the memory of my lantern bursting into light of its own accord. Once, in 1913, I returned to Kauai on business of land appraisal. Curiosity drew me back toward Kahili. The plantation had changed, new machinery standing where our wooden bunkhouses had once leaned. I hired a boy to guide me to the Waiahi Ridge. The flume we had planned now straddled the gulches in great wooden trestles, yet when we neared that hollow, the boy halted. "We do not go there," he said. "Nightwalker's place. My uncles say so." He refused, though I offered extra coin. I did not press the point. That night, I lodged with an old clerk who had known Macpherson. Over rum, he spoke of a curious entry in an early 20th century ledger. There were several weeks, he said, when no overseer would sleep alone on the upper fields. Some nonsense about torches. Old Mac shut them up, but I heard him mutter that if the ghosts wished the ridge, they might keep it. Time rolled on. I married, then buried my wife. I worked on other surveys, tracing railroads across the mainland, yet the march followed me. Twice, on winter nights in Utah, I woke to the sensation of a tremor under my mattress, as if many feet passed somewhere below, though no train ran nearby. Once, during an electrical storm near Tucson, the lamps in the boarding house fluttered all at once, and for a heartbeat, the air filled with the bitter scent of salt and old sweat. I stepped outside, expecting to see a column on the horizon, but the desert lay empty. In 1927, I encountered Manuel again in San Francisco by chance, outside a Portuguese grocery. His hair had whitened, but I knew him by the set of his shoulders. We shared coffee at a small table, speaking first of mundane matters. At length he said, "Do you hear them still in dreams?" I answered. He nodded slowly. Me also. When the church bells ring for a procession, I smell the sea, though there is none near. Perhaps they marked us. Eh? We looked when we should not have. Neither of us could say whether that thought gave more comfort or fear. I have learned over these many years to accept that certain phenomena resist our instruments. The transit measures only what stands still under its crosshairs. The compass presumes that north remains obedient. Yet on that ridge in 1905, both earth and sky bent around a procession older than metal or map. What scale could weigh a silence that falls like a curtain? What lens could capture a torch that burns without smoke? Even now, some nights, I wake to the faint clink of unseen arms and a murmur of voices descending from a height. I lie very still, eyes closed, recalling Kalani's hand driving my face into the dirt. The smell comes next, sharp and metallic, and the air around my bed cools as if a cloud passed before the moon. In those moments, the walls of whatever room I occupy dissolve, and I am again among the cane, every stalk a spear, every shadow a watching helm. I have no final theory to offer, no chart that maps the interval between the living and the long dead. I know only this. On a July night in 1905, above the sugar fields of Kauai, 4 men left the known path and survived by lying very close to the earth, while an army that belonged to no present kingdom passed within 10 paces of their heads. In the end, it is not their pale eyes or their soundless march that troubles me most, but the memory of the crushed ribbon of grass they left behind. still pressed flat in the morning sun, as though the land itself had bowed to let them through.